Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jed Lee, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Join us right now from the beautiful city of Vancouver in British Columbia, in the beautiful nation of Canada. Our guest is here today to celebrate a really great book. It's called Can We Play Baseball, Mr. DeMille? Please welcome to the show, Mark Angelo. Hey, Mark. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing fine, Jed. How are you?
I'm really wonderful. I love that you're coming to us from Vancouver. We've had so many guests join us from British Columbia. It sounds like it's a real hotbed of creativity.
It is. You know, there's a lot going on here, whether it be from a writing perspective, a film perspective. It's a great place to live. You know, I grew up in California, in Southern California, certainly enjoyed my time there, but I've been here in British Columbia now for a long time, and it's a place that I truly love.
It's surprising, I guess, that to hear that you went from SoCal, where another place we've had lots of authors from. Never having visited Vancouver myself, I just get this. Anything in Canada, I just imagine as being frozen for most of the year. But I understand Vancouver is a lot different than Saskatchewan and Saskatoon and Alberta.
Yes, it is a bit warmer here. You know, it's not quite as cold as places like Winnipeg or if you head all the way back to the east, but it's a beautiful city. You know, beautiful mountains, beautiful rivers, nice. You know, we're right on the ocean. It's a great place to be.
So, being from Southern California, it makes sense that you've written this book about baseball and about the Hollywood icon, Mr. DeMille.
Well, you know, certainly it's a story that my brother and I talked about a lot over the years. And I always thought it was a great story. I'll tell you a little bit more about it in a minute, but it's a story with multiple elements. I always enjoyed telling it. And a couple of years ago, my brother was ill, and I went down back to Los Angeles, and we spent a couple of days telling stories from our past. And this one in particular, we laughed about, and my brother suggested that I write it finally, you know. So that's what I set out to do, and the book is in fact dedicated to the memory of my brother, and certainly writing it brought back incredible memories, and it is a fun story.
Well, you know, as I'm looking at your website and looking at some of the art from the book, it certainly does bring back memories for this almost 100-year-old guy of, you know, baseball cards and playing what we would call sandlot baseball, which basically meant just playing baseball in whatever open space that we could find that we weren't going to be chased out of. And those are really, really fun memories. And it's something I don't think a lot, certainly not here in the East Coast. You don't see kids just going out and getting a pickup game of baseball together anymore. Lots of kids are playing baseball, and they're in all sorts of organized sports, and they're getting great instruction, and they're using great equipment and playing on beautiful fields. But that's a lot different than what you and I experienced as kids.
Yeah, you don't see it as much as you used to. And you mentioned Sandlot. You know, the movie The Sandlot was one of my favorite films of all time. But those were amazing years, and I do think this story is a timely one. It's got lots of different elements to it. It's fun. It's uplifting. There is an element of nostalgia to it. Even the illustrations, which I thought Patricia and Robin DeWitt did, have a wonderful feel to them, very much a nostalgic feel to them. But But the book also speaks to community. It's got an environmental message to it as well that I'd love to talk about in a couple of minutes. But it's a true story, from my own childhood, and one that my brother and I often talked about. And it tells the story of a young boy, his friends, and their love of a game. In this case, the great game of baseball. And it focuses on their search for a place to play ball, which ultimately led to this incredible encounter. But it's the kind of story I hope that many children will identify with, and that it does focus on a shy but determined young boy. But also for parents, my hope is it'll get them thinking back to their own childhood, those very special years, and hopefully it'll make them smile.
Yeah. And, one thing I just want to mention before I asked you to tell us a little bit more about the story and about all the different elements. One of the pictures features a group of kids. There's a kid sliding into base, which is basically just a jacket.
Exactly.
Which is so.
We didn't have real bases back then.
I remember the first time I played with a real base. I think I broke my ankle. But in addition to the base, that's basically just a piece of cloth. You have a girl playing. And that was something that my cousin Darlene was the best player on our makeup teams. And, we've heard that, girls weren't able to play in Little League and all this stuff. And that was true. But girls certainly were able to go out and play with us on the sandlot because we just needed everybody we could to get enough people to play a game.
Oh, Jed, that's so true. We would pull together all the kids that we could, and, often we'd need a certain number so we could have, something close to a real game. And it was wonderful. There were boys and girls, there were kids, quite a wide range and age span, quite an age span. I was the youngest at the time, but there were kids that would come out and play with us that were 3-4 years older. But it was fun. It was this particular field became a neighborhood gathering spot, and it brought together kids from from all across the neighborhood, and that sense of community, the things you do at that age with your friends, that's a key message in the book as well.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about this story.
Well, the story goes back to 1958 when the Los Angeles Dodgers first arrived to L.A. They had come there from Brooklyn, and the city was literally going through Dodger mania. And myself and my brother and my friends, we were the most avid Dodger fans. I was the kind of kid that you talked about exchanging baseball cards. We all had baseball cards back then, trading cards all the time. I would listen to the game at night. Even as a boy, I'd go to bed early so I could turn the radio on and listen to the game as long as I could stay awake. Ben Scully, a very famous broadcaster, was the Dodger broadcaster back then. And I'd listen to him call the game every night, and my parents would tiptoe into my room about 9:30 or 10 and turn the radio off after I had fallen asleep. But, we loved baseball. We were always out, playing catch, trading baseball cards. The one thing we didn't have in our neighborhood was a place to play ball. We lived up in the hills, and there simply weren't there weren't any appropriate places to play ball. And the public parks that were around, they were a long way away, too far away for young kids to get to. So that led us to explore the possibility of playing in Mr. DeMille's yard. He had this massive yard at the time that, and it wasn't even fenced. He had a big, like a cedar hedge down at one end of it, and it had a little cave-like opening in it, and we could look at that field, and it was seldom used. We seldom saw people there. So we decided one afternoon to take a stab at it. So we crawled through the cave-like opening onto the field, and we played ball and had a wonderful time, and nobody told us to leave. So we came back the next day and then the next, and before you knew it, it became a neighborhood gathering spot until one day that summer, Mr. DeMille's gardener approached us and told us that too many of our balls had ended up in his prized rose garden, and he told us we had to leave, and we were crushed. So we all crawled back through the cave-like opening onto the street and thinking that our baseball games had come to an end. But I couldn't help but think there had to be something we could do. So I suggested that we go talk to the great Mr. DeMille. And I had never met him before. I'd only seen him from afar as he drove through the neighborhood in his big, dark vehicle. But my friends and my brother were nervous about doing that, but finally everybody agreed. So we set off to Mr. DeMille's house, and I wanted to go talk to him. But as I started to walk up the stairs, my friends didn't want to go. They decided to stay behind and wait for me and hide along the street. So I knew at that point I was totally alone. So I had to go up to the front door and ring the doorbell, and I remember just being so nervous and wondering if I was really doing the right thing. But in turn, that's what led to this incredible encounter. And just to quickly say, when I got there, and I finally got the nerve to ring the doorbell, and I had my trusty Dodger hat on and everything else, his butler answered the door, and I asked if I could talk to Mr. DeMille. I told him I was here to talk to him about baseball, and he told me Mr. DeMille is unavailable. And then I went on to say, how as kids we want to play ball more than anything else, but there's no place to play. We love the Dodgers. We want to be ball players just like them. And I'd really like to talk to Mr. DeMille about baseball. We've been playing in his yard. We weren't supposed to do that. I'm sorry for that, but I'd love to talk to him about it. And the butler said, once again, I'm sorry, he's not available. And, sadly, I accepted that, and I turned to walk away. And then I heard this distant voice in the hallway behind the butler saying, "Show the young man in." And that in turn led to this encounter. But it was quite something.
That is amazing. And we should point out that the Mr. DeMille that we're talking about was the Hollywood mogul, Mr. DeMille, right?
Mr. DeMille was an amazing man in terms of his accomplishments. Many consider him, he is actually the founding father of American cinema. He produced, going all the way back to 1914, the first full-length feature film shot in Hollywood. He's perhaps the most commercially successful producer-director of all time. All of us, especially those of our age, but most people, I think, have seen his films. The film 10 Commandments is still shown regularly. His movie, The Greatest Show on Earth, won the Best Picture Oscar in 1952. I think many people know him by his reputation. They know him for his work in a more formal way. But this book strives to put a more human face on him. And I have to say that one singular direct encounter I had with him was unforgettable in every sense of the word.
It's hard for me to imagine that moment. Here it is. You're like, this is the guy that everybody's like, they see in the limos, and his name is up on the big screen. And back then, people need to remember that back then, the big screen was kind of like it. We don't have all these 8,000 different screens that we can carry around in a pocket and see anything anytime we want. It's you went to the movies and you hoped you got there and saw it the week that it was in the movie theater before it moved on.
Jed, you're so right. And that's why they call it kind of the golden age of movies, because back then movies really were it. Television was in its infancy. Movies were still a big, big thing. And Mr. DeMille was, by most accounts, in the view of many people, most people, the greatest person in film. Certainly at that time, and many would argue he still is today.
I got to ask, and I was in that position that you were in of like, oh, yeah, we have this great plan. Okay, so you knock on the door, and then you go up to whatever door it is, whether it's Mr. DeMille or the mean old lady who lives around the corner, and you go knock on the door, and you turn around and it's like, wait a minute, there was an army behind me. Where'd you guys all go?
Jed, that's exactly how it was. So anyway, when he said, "Show the young man in," and I realized that I was going to have a chance to see Mr. DeMille, I really at that point wondered if I had done the right thing, and I remembered even to this day, my heart, I think it's the first time in my life that I could remember hearing my heart just beat 100 miles an hour. But anyway, so I followed the butler in and down this long hallway and into this waiting room, and there was Mr. DeMille, and then our conversation started.
That was amazing. So, are you able to tell us the outcome of the conversation, or do we have to wait to read the book?
Well, I'd like you to read the book, but
okay.
I can just say that it was an incredible encounter, and as young as I was, I still remember it so well. And I started off talking very, very nervously, and then, but yeah, I finally got all the words out, and I asked him the main question I had come to ask. But I'll never forget his response. And once again, I think this book puts a very human face on C.B. DeMille. And I have to say that he passed away just several months after I met him. And I was quite sad to see that. But this was the only direct face-to-face encounter that I had with him in all the years in the years I was there.
Wow. I'm curious, what's the response been from his estate?
Well, I think most people that have seen the book, it's only now coming out, but I think they feel very good about it. I mean, it certainly puts and I talk about Mr. DeMille in the end, and he was a man in the end that allowed children to be just that, children. He had in that one encounter, and that's all I can speak to, but I think his family, his estate looks at the book in a very positive way because, once again, I think it puts a very human face on this incredible gentleman.
Yeah. And I think, too, it's just, and you mentioned you were going to talk a little bit about the environmental message. For years, people have dreamed and hoped to have this beautiful lawn with the roses and the garden and just pristine. But now we're starting to realize that, those beautiful lawns that are acres and acres and no one ever steps foot on, those aren't the best thing for the environment.
No question. There's an environmental cost to that, without question. But it's interesting, Jed, you talk about kind of the environmental element in this book. Writing it made me even more cognizant of how my own childhood search for a field to play ball influenced my later work as an environmental advocate and a longtime proponent for accessible outdoor spaces for all to enjoy. That's the kind of work that I've done my whole life on the environmental side, relating to parks. Also, I do a lot of work pertaining to river conservation as well, but all of my work has been kind of environmentally focused. But I look back to my childhood, and in those years I lived in the hills, and there were few places to play ball. Public parks, as I said earlier, were simply too far away for young kids to get to. All of that had a big influence on me. So I think in the book I tried to make the point that accessible outdoor spaces for all, young and old, that they're important. From parks to sport fields, they contribute greatly to our health, our well-being, and they make our communities better places to live.
Yeah. And the life that you and your friends brought to Mr. DeMille's backyard, you probably trampled some roses and trampled down the grass, and there may have been a path that was kind of worn out around those makeshift bases. But it was life, and there was fun, and there was love being had in those fields. And that's so much more beautiful than just this picturesque thing that exists that no one can really touch.
Very good point, Jed. And certainly using those spaces, I think, is so positive. And and that field, Mr. DeMille's yard, literally became the field of our dreams, as kids. And it was gosh, I remember when we first played there, to actually be able to play ball in our neighborhood, our own neighborhood, was so exciting. And, I remember hearing the great sounds of the game, the crack of the bat when you got a hit, the ribbing between the kids on both teams, the whack of the ball when it hits your glove, just the sounds of ball, the sounds of kids laughing, that kind of life. So that field that was so little used, all of a sudden it came to life, and it became this neighborhood gathering place. And, the laughter there was incredible. And I think in the end, Mr. DeMille saw value in that.
Yeah. And I really hope that parents and kids sit down, read this book, and talk about it. And maybe we'll see a resurgence of sandlot baseball, or just kids going out and spontaneously coming together and playing a game and having fun, because we don't see enough of that these days.
Oh, Jed, I agree. And for children that read this, my hope is they'll identify with this shy young boy who was very determined, his nervousness that he had to overcome before meeting with Mr. DeMille. But for parents as well, once again, I do hope it casts them back to that time in their lives when they were young, and our summer is centered around playing with friends, doing things like sandlot baseball, and hopefully that'll make them smile. And I'd love to think that we'll see more kids today doing that same kind of thing.
Absolutely. Mark, where can we go to find out more about you, and Can We Play Baseball, Mr. DeMille, and maybe some of the other work that you're involved in?
Well, if you go to our website, Can We Play Baseball, Mr. DeMille, there's a good summary of the book there. It'll give you an example of a few of the illustrations. There's also a bit of a bio on myself, and and it'll direct you to some of the other books that I've written, and some of the work that I do.
Awesome. And that's canweplaybaseballmrdemille.com. And you absolutely want to go there. The illustrations that are featured on the page are really fun. And if you were my age, it's just going to bring back so many memories. And even the butler showing you up the door, it reminds me of being shown out many doors without anybody saying, "Bring the young man back in." It was more like, "Call the cops on that kid." We've had a great time speaking to the author of Can We Play Baseball, Mr. DeMille, Mark Angelo. Hey, Mark, thanks so much for being with us.
Jed, thank you for having me. Have a good day.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast, and we hope that you'll join us for the next exciting episode of the show. To make sure you don't miss a moment of the show, please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, wherever you get your podcasts. Big thanks going out to my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Jordan Saley, Will Cheever, Cassandra Masonet, Stephanie Davila. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.